And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Looking at tonight's weather again, front pushes through into Canada, so winds and precipitation will begin to ease off here for the southeast coast. Periods of snow continue here over the central eastern interior again, all the way up to the Arctic coast, and maybe some snow showers possibly working into Kodiak Island, and stays cold and snowy with gusty winds for the eastern Bering Sea along the west coast here with less snow over the inland areas. But winter weather advisory, snow and blowing snow in the Alaska Peninsula. And then out to the west, you can see just coming onto the chart here tonight, next big storm bringing gale force winds and snow changing to rain into the western Aleutians. Weakening front spread some increase in the wind and rain for the Adak-Atka area as it improves here pretty nicely for the Pribilofs of the eastern Aleutians. Still windy with snow and blowing snow for the Alaska Peninsula, but a lot less of that condition here along the west coast, and dry over the western interior. Still snow, periods of here, light snow from the North Gulf Coast, south central Alaska, northward again across the eastern interior. And for the day Thursday, another front here brings gale and storm force winds to the southeast coastal areas with another round of rain, possibly heavy at times, and still lingering chances of snow over the Copper River Basin, maybe northward there in toward Chicken, southward toward Northway and Tok. Otherwise dry over the interior, and this front bringing some pretty good winds into St. Matthew Island. Less of wind for the Pribilofs, more southeast there, so snow changing to rain, central Aleutians, and behind that front pushing into the eastern Aleutians. Coastal water forecast for the Panhandle, south winds 30 knots for the entire coastline tomorrow, and Lynn Canal, southeast winds 30, gusts 45 knots, southeast 25 for Stevens Passage, Clarence Strait, south winds 25 knots. Thursday, next front developing and pressing in toward the coast, really kicks the winds back up here. Southeast 45 to 50 knots for the south coast, central coast, southeast 45 to 50 knots, and for the north coast, east-southeast 35 to 40 knots. With seas right around 30 feet here for a good portion of the coastline. Lynn Canal, south winds at 20, southeast 30-knot winds for Stevens Passage, and Clarence Strait, full gales south at 45 knots, seas 15 feet. Prince William Sound, southeast winds 20 knots, eastern North Gulf Coast, southeast at 20 to 25 knots. Lighter 15-knot southeast winds for the western North Gulf Coast, but good gales here, west 45 knots, Kamishak Bay turned northwest at 40 knots for the Barren Islands, Cook Inlet, northerlies 15 to 20. And for Thursday, north-northeast 10 to 20 knots for Cook Inlet, small craft advisory, so winds diminishing for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, 25 to 30 knots, still out of the northwest, northwest 15 there for the western North Gulf Coast, and north-northeast 15 to 25 for the east side. Prince William Sound, north winds 15 knots. Kodiak Island, northwest winds 35 to 40 knots with gusts of 55 knots there for Shelikof Strait. And gales and storm force winds here for the Alaska Peninsula, northwest 45 to 60 knots, even gusts of 65 knots there for a portion of the peninsula on the Pacific side, north at 30 knots for Bristol Bay. And for Thursday, north winds, north to northwest winds, but mostly north winds, 25 knots for the Alaska Peninsula, and Bristol Bay north at 20, Kodiak Island northwest 20 to 25 knots. And for Unalaska Island, gales tomorrow, northwest 40 knots, but toward Nikolsky, northwest 25, and then with that front swinging in southwest, that's a warmer southwest wind, 25 knots, Adak and Atka, gale warnings, west of Adak to Shimia for south to southeast winds 35 to 45 knots. And then we've got southwest winds 20 to 30 knots here for the western Aleutians, Adak and Atka, about the same, but more of a south-southwest wind there, 7 to 16-foot seas, with those winds at about 30 knots. Eastern Aleutians, small craft advisories, south to southeasterlies 25 to 30 knots. And for the southwest coast and St. Lawrence Island, gale warnings, north winds 40 knots continue to blow, north at 30 for Norton Sound, north 30 for the Pribilofs, and still some northerly gales there for St. Matthew Island at 35 knots. And then for Thursday, Those winds turn easterly here at 45 knots for St. Matthew Island. Seas 21 feet, gale warnings for the Pribilof, southeast 35 knots. Lighter winds here now along the coast and east-northeasterlies 15 to 20 knots. Northeast 15 knots, Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, north to northwest winds at 20 knots. And for the central and west side here, lighter north winds at 10 to 15 knots. And then gales for 30 to 40 knot winds out of the north for the Chukchi Sea. Those lighten up considerably on Thursday, now north to northeast at 10 to 20 knots. Lighter westerly winds, western and central Arctic coast, and not too bad even on the east side here, west-southwest 15 to 20 knots.